Malcolm Hoare.
Here.
Thank you.
Here.
Thank you. Martha Krieger.
Here.
Okay, thank you. Michael Estasio.
Here.
Thank you. Noshin Ullah.
Here.
Thank you. Priya Talreja.
Here. And
Thank
also I can take notes.
Thank you so much. Sal Herrera. I'll skip back. Okay.
I'm present.
Great, thank you.
Desiree, Applegate, and Rosemary we were on a different link, so they should be coming on soon too.
Got it. All right, Samantha Chang.
Here. Gonna work.
Thank you. Terry Sorensen is a guest. Terry.
Yeah.
Thanks. Ty Lee.
Here.
Thanks. And Yvette, Dr. Yvette Helmers.
Here.
Thank you. Jenny Applegreen.
Here.
Thank you. And Trustee Campbell.
Jenny sent her the link, so she should be here any minute.
She's here.
Okay.
But Trustee, you're on mute. Or President Campbell, you're on mute.
Okay, I'm here.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, so I think that's everybody. So if there is no objection, I'd like to go ahead and adopt the agenda. So seeing no objection, we'll go ahead and adopt the agenda as written. Now, similarly, without objection, I'd like to adopt the meeting minutes for October 8th, 2020. They are located in Exhibit A. So feel free to, in the chat, or alternatively, raising your hand to object. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and adopt the October 8th, 2020 meeting minutes. And now we're going to go ahead and take a presentation from mental health professionals, and we'll have a Q&A. The target is to have this be 20 minutes, maximum 15 of the presentation with 5 minutes for Q&A. So let me go ahead and make a timer for that time. And for the speakers, I've asked them to keep their presentation to 2 to 3 minutes. So I'll just ping in at around 2 minutes 15 so that we can all track. And we have the order. If everybody could go to Exhibit A.5, I had to squeeze it in there. And I'm going to go ahead and try to present my screen.
Antonio.
Yes, go ahead.
I believe it's Rosemary Andrade. I don't know. I don't think there's a waiting room, but she's waiting. It says for her to wait.
Greg, are you able to? Okay, great. Hi, Rosemary. Thank you. We're just about to get started. Okay, so I'm going to hand it off now to the mental health professionals, and I am sharing my screen. So go ahead, Dr. Helmers. And just to remind everybody, what we asked is, for these professionals to speak as to their training, experience, and perspective. And so we were able to find from Fremont Unified, a school psychologist, a school nurse, a behavior intervention specialist, a school counselor, and then outside of FUSD from Oakley Unified, Dr. Katie Raher, who is a school psychologist. And now I'll hand it off to Dr. Yvette Helmers.
Antonio, will you be advancing the slides?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. Mental health is very important to me. I am currently at Irvington High School. I have a bachelor's in psychology, a master's in educational, and a master's in information system, ed specialist, PPS credential. I'm licensed educational psychologist. I have my doctorate in educational psychology. I've been crisis prevention trained and telehealth certified. I've been working for 50 early start all the way through community day school, through counseling and rich programs, and I love my job. Okay. So my perspective is right now, our current state, and this is as of 2020 data, we've had an increase in major depressive disorder from 8.66% to 13.1% between the ages of 12 and 17. We have over 20 million youth that have major depressive disorder with severe impairment, and 10.3 million adults are exhibiting severe thoughts of suicide. So despite, for example, at my site, despite the various agencies that we've had, we've still had an increase in mental health issues from 54% and 85% of 2,400 students demonstrating symptoms of moderate to severe depression or anxiety in 2019. So for me, I received social emotional concerns reported by teachers, staff, parents, students every day. They are affected by self-injurious behavior, such as cutting, suicidal ideation, depression, anxiety. School avoidance is the big one. A lot of our students have maladaptive perfectionism. They're self-medicating, and many have attempted suicide.
Thank you, Dr. Helmers. And we're gonna go ahead and.
Okay, so what we currently have right now, these are the evidence-based interventions that we have. We have everyday speech that I run groups with in conjunction with the speech therapist. Strong Teens, which is based heavily in cognitive behavior therapy. And the sessions are every 6 weeks with 8 to 10 students. We have social thinking for students that need more pragmatics. And then a new one that we've just added is girls in real life situations, but we're changing the name to real life situations. It covers body imaging and healthy relationships and things like that.
Thank you, Dr. Helmers. And now I'll introduce Debbie Weir.
Thank you. I'm a registered nurse. I have a master's in the science of nursing. I also have a California School Nurse Services credential, and I'm a certificated mindfulness educator. I have 14 years experience as a school nurse, 12 in Fremont, and previously I was a pediatric ICU nurse. In the school setting, we often see students with somatic complaints such as headaches, stomach aches, difficulty breathing, or panic attacks. School nurses work with the students in the moment to identify if the issue is a social emotional one, and to lower their anxiety through simple listening, breathing techniques, or mindfulness. For some students and families, there may be less stigma in reaching out to the school nurse instead of initially seeking mental health counseling. And sometimes I think the school nurse can become a bridge to help the family seek out the social and emotional support the student really needs. Many students have chronic illnesses. Students and parents in these situations experience depression, frustration, and may be overwhelmed at times. We work with parents, healthcare providers, and all school staff to ensure students can safely participate in all school programs. And in many instances, we're providing resources and making referrals for both health care and mental health support. A nurse may make a phone call to a parent regarding a missing immunization or concerns about absenteeism. And these calls often lead to a discussion about a student's sleep habits or the amount and type of screen time they're accessing, an overall conversation about the student's general well-being. And we often work with the parent to explore solutions and connect them to resources that benefit the student to improve their health and school readiness and attendance. In anticipating the increased physical and mental health needs of students upon return to after the pandemic, we just don't want students to be overlooked. We want them to be ready for school and to thrive, and that's our goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie, so much. And now I'll hand it off to Rosemary Andrade, who's a behavior intervention specialist.
Hello, everyone. My name's Rosemary, and I am a behavior intervention specialist with Fremont Unified. I have degrees in psychology and counseling with an emphasis in applied behavior analysis. I'm also a board certified behavior analyst and a nonviolent crisis intervention instructor. I've been in the field for about 21 years working with individuals with special needs. Next slide, please. For my job, essentially there's two main areas of supports: behavior intervention and crisis intervention. For behavior intervention, it consists of the things that you see there on the screen. So assessments, observations of students, lots of data collection and data analyses, using that information to make recommendations for students as far as goals, accommodations, behavior intervention, also ensuring that we're utilizing evidence-based practices. So also training staff on how to use as evidence-based practices for intervention. We also provide ongoing consultation. And then as part of that process, we're always reevaluating the effectiveness of the interventions we put in place. When the interventions are implemented with fidelity, we see tremendous benefit to students, including increasing their ability to access curriculum, ability to, next slide. Increasing their ability to be more independent and acquire skills over time. And obviously it reduces problem behavior, it reduces the need for supports over time, and it ensures that students remain in the least restrictive environment. And then the crisis intervention consists of supporting students and staff during a crisis event, with the main objective being keeping everyone as safe as possible and also de-escalating the student in the moment as much as we can. Some students engage in severe behavior problems such as hitting their own head into the ground, biting themselves, biting others, hitting, kicking, punching, throwing tables and chairs. And some of these events that can be very intensive and last a considerably long amount of time. For the best outcome for students and staff and to ensure safety, training is really important, as are access to resources. And lastly, there are times when the severity of the behavior becomes so great that we do rely and call on our SROs.
And now I'll hand it off to school counselor Terry Sorensen.
Hello, good evening. My name is Terry Sorensen, and I am a counselor at American High School. This is my 8th year at American and my FUSD, and 10 years as a school counselor. And I have a bachelor's degree in social and behavioral science with a concentration in social psychology, and a master's degree in educational counseling with a pupil personnel services credential. At American High School, I have a caseload of about 615 students, and I want to note that because the American School Counselor Association recommends 250 to 1 in order for a counselor to effectively support the academic, career, and social emotional development of all students, which is really important, is making sure that we are reaching all students. Next slide. The reality of this is that we serve as the first line, one of the first line of defense in identifying and addressing students' social emotional needs within the school setting. And we have unique training in helping students with social emotional issues that may become barriers to academic success. However, FUSD counselors are rarely able to focus on the social emotional education and prevention due to our really high caseloads. We do try to cover all areas of academic, career, and social emotional, but the needs of social emotional needs are often forced to be reactionary rather than being preventative. So we're often triaging one mental health crisis to the next. And so we do spend a lot of time doing that. It's also important to note that counselors are designed to do short-term counseling. So that's brief intervention and then referral to long-term supports. But we are really jumping from crisis to crisis, and where the SROs support counselors is in assessing safety, risk evaluation 5150s, and child abuse and neglect. And so on this slide, these are experiences that I've had with regard to mental health with students and families where my SRO or our SRO has taken place and been a part of that. As you may know, when there is a crisis present on campus where there is an immediate danger, the current protocol is for us to consult with our SRO and have them meet and talk with our students or whoever has the concern to make that determination with regard to their safety. We absolutely need more supports for students. In terms of their mental health, we need to be able to access them more, to be preventative, to provide just more education and more understanding, and just a resource to support them through the challenges of school. So some of the needs that I have here are more school counselors and ratios so we can access students. You'll see that I've listed access to the school nurse. For example, if the SRO responds to a student-related panic attack, I would, like to have my nurse come in and help in that situation if they were accessible on campus. But also a mental health professional, marriage and family therapist, social worker. We do know that students access more mental health supports on campus. It is about 70 to 80% in terms of research access their mental health supports on a school campus. And research indicates that about 20% of students are in need of mental health services, yet only 1 of 5 of those students get that. So really giving them access where we know that they will get the support and the help. Which leads me to social emotional learning curriculum for all students across the board. We could all benefit from learning about healthy coping skills and managing our emotions or reaching out for help, and training for teachers, even when I'm on campus or in this distant environment that we're in right now. There's a lot of need and a lot of support that teachers need as well, and they need to understand how best to support students, but also how to get additional support and help for them too. I also included some school counseling resources. So the school counselor and student mental health is where I got the facts that I kind of read off to you about the 20% of students in need, addition to some other resources, and then just the data that shows the effectiveness of school counseling at all levels.
Thank you, Terry. And I'll hand it over to Dr. Katie Raher.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My bachelor's is in human development, master's and PhD, both in school psychology from UC Berkeley. I also have my People Personnel Services credential in school psychology, and I've been a Kimochi certified trainer since 2016. Kimochis is a word in Japanese that means feelings, and it is a social and emotional learning curriculum. So I've been working in schools, pre-K to 12, supporting children, families, and educators for about a little over 18 years. I work part-time as a prevention-focused school psychologist, and the other days I have a business focused on the growth and well-being of children. That's Constant Love and Learning. I've also previously started my career as an elementary school and preschool teacher. In my role as a school psychologist and as a teacher over my career, I've done a lot of mental health consultation. School psychologists are trained heavily in that, but often aren't allowed to do or aren't not able to do that because of high caseload. But I have had the good fortune of doing prevention work and doing a lot of mental health consultation, so it's really preventative in nature. But also been the chair of positive behavior interventions and supports in elementary school. So that's, you maybe have heard that as PBIS, chaired early childhood behavioral wellness, coordinated district 504 revisions. I've also obviously do some psychoeducational evaluations as a school psychologist. And in my business, I've trained over 2,000 educators and mental health clinicians in using the Kimochi social emotional and tools basically to support mental health across multiple tiers of support. So universally, ideally, we should be giving 100% of our students support with evidence-based social emotional learning curriculum and behavior support, and obviously high quality academic instruction as well. But so about 85% of children, that first level of intervention is very successful, and then for about 15% of students, they typically need more intensive intervention, more targeted intervention. So I've supported people learning how to do all the multiple tiers of intervention. I've also provided educator well-being programs to educators, and I consistently provide free resources to educators and mental health clinicians to just support with well-being, growth, and equity in schools. And also I've done some large-scale research at the national level through UC Berkeley, and also investigated effectiveness of interventions to support mental health across various schools in the Bay Area. Oh, and next slide. Thank you. And so for me, the big take-home message is that we do need a continuum and prevention of mental health, and we need prevention of mental health disorders. Mental health is not just about serving kids who are having mental health challenges. It's about the prevention piece. It's about making sure that we foster and nurture that mental health early on. And so ideally, we should be giving social and emotional learning curriculum and instruction to all kids universally from the second they arrive at a public educational institution. And there is a huge return on investment. So CASEL, which stands for the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, it's a national organization that studies social emotional learning and the many, many benefits. And there are so many benefits. They're significant when they've done meta-analyses looking at over 250 studies, experimental studies, to figure out when kids get social emotional learning versus kids who are randomly assigned to not get it, what's the benefits. And there's tremendous benefits in terms of social skills, mental health, and preventing of mental health disorders. There's huge benefits in attitudes towards school, towards self, towards others. There's huge benefits in academics. And so it's just, there's so many benefits. And with all of these kinds of benefits, so both in terms of the short-term benefits in the school environment through that 12th grade, and there's just so many benefits in terms of beyond, in terms of reduced incarceration rates, reduced substance abuse, reduced homelessness, improved employment, improved college attendance, all these kinds of things. What they know is that for every dollar invested in high quality social emotional learning, there's an $11 return on your investment over time. It is profound. And so I'm a big advocate for universal social emotional learning. And then I'm going to kind of skip down to the bottom, but really multi-tiered systems of support. So for those kids who don't then benefit, I mean, it's not that they don't benefit, the kids who don't respond as well to that initial support, that they get additional targeted and more intensive interventions. But so much of that isn't even needed when you give this universal support. So I've had not only reducing caseloads for the school psychologists and school counselors, when you have enough mental health professionals to provide this universal support, and you give the training to the teachers as well, you actually reduce the amount of kids who end up needing to get referred for mental health. You reduce those crises, all those the kind of chaotic situations. So it's profound in the short and long term. I think that it's, and beyond the social emotional learning piece, and let me back up. The social emotional learning really is about helping kids gain self-awareness. What am I feeling? What is going on inside? Self-management. How do I manage and cope with whatever is going on for me, both in terms of managing my anger or sadness or whatever, but also cultivating a positive mindset, cultivating more of those positive emotions to be able to support with more resilience with those trickier feelings. And then it's about relationships, conflict management, responsible decision making, and being aware of others as well. So all of that, but then also, there are additional evidence-based practices that are powerful, trauma-informed work, mindfulness, so much more. And then additionally, my last thing is just supporting the educators and clinicians themselves is hugely important. CASEL, it's a huge organization. I know I'm probably out of time. Let me just wrap this last comment.
Right.
It's just that they're finding out that adult social emotional learning and the adult well-being is foundational as well, because when you support the adults, they are able to create more positive and influential relationships with the students, which is the ultimate foundation of mental health. When children feel connected, they will thrive.
Okay, and
Thank
I just want to make clear that obviously we could have invited one of these speakers and they would have been able to present during the whole time, but we wanted to give you a breadth of mental health needs. I do want to, so we did exhaust our time there, but I did promise everybody, 5 minutes of questions. So I'll ask if there's any objection to extending us 5 minutes for this section so that we can field any questions. And then we would be moving to the inviting in the sergeant to answer questions for 20 minutes. I'm just trying to avoid having to do motions to ask for more time because that ends up taking time. So if we don't have any objections and we are happy to have these guests for 5 more minutes, then let's go ahead and do so. If you could raise your physical hand or alternatively put yourself in the chat. So I see Joyce and Marie. Go ahead, Joyce.
Thank you. I had a question for our first presenter. I'm sorry that I don't remember her name. Hi. One of your slides that talked about preventative or using interventions, and you referenced speech as an intervention, and I'm just curious how speech intervention works within this scope of stuff for our students.
So during the COVID-19 shutdown, we found a online program. It's called Everyday Speech. And so with the speech therapist, there's a social pragmatics module, and there's also a social emotional module. So our admin bought us one license and we share it. And I use the social emotional module, and then she uses the pragmatics model, and we all do the sessions together.
Oh, okay. Okay. And Antonio, I wrote down 2 questions. Can I ask the second question and then I'm done?
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So then our second presenter talked about using evidence-based, maybe it was the third. Evidence-based practices as it relates to this one. Recommendations include the use of evidence-based practices. Could you explain what evidence you're using in the evidence-based practices? What's the evidence?
Basically, it's any research validated, peer-reviewed, strategy or support that meets the criteria, and every organization has different criteria, but it essentially has to meet a minimum threshold of criteria to show that it is an indeed effective strategy. So for example, using reinforcement to essentially, increase the positive behaviors that we want to see. So that would be an example.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Antonio.
And we have 3 minutes, so Marie and Annie.
So my question's for Terry. She mentioned that a gap, if she couldn't use her SRO, would be to deal with child abuse and sexual abuse. And I am curious why that would be a gap and why you don't go to Child Protective Services and why you use the SRO.
Yeah, so thank you for actually going back to the slide. One of the things that I wanted to mention is that with our SRO, the response time to these incidences are faster than if I were to call Fremont PD or CPS if there were an immediate CPS concern where I had a student that was visibly not okay. Based off of that, I'll try to explain that again. But so it's essentially the response time, and this is what my SRO has responded to in terms of immediate needs with students. So you're right that in situations we do call CPS. In situations, our SRO, Fremont PD, is a CPS reporting agency. And so there have been concerns on campus that have had a required police involvement that our SRO has responded to with regard to CPS and sexual assault, if that answers your question.
Thank you. And Annie, and we're down to 1:30.
Yes, sorry. My question is actually also for Terry. I believe you were the one that cited the ratio between you and students. I was a little bit shocked by that. I was wondering if, like, trying to understand the SRO and that relationship, and I'm wondering if there were more counselors. Would some of those needs that you cited that the SRO fills be filled, or is there something special about the SRO, or is it just that they're another personnel and you don't have another counselor to deal with that situation?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that if we had access to more preventative services and more counselors and more social emotional learning curriculum and just access to be preventative with students, I probably wouldn't need my SRO as much as I do to respond to emergency crisis situations. I am constantly responding to crisis situations. My students are struggling, and I mean, I think they're struggling across the district, but I'm speaking for myself personally that there is a lot of need, and I really want the power to focus on prevention so that I can make sure that my students are just supported and taken care of over the course of time, not just for the immediate crisis intervention that I give until the next immediate crisis intervention that I have to give until the next one. And so it can sometimes be moving on from one crisis to the next. And I apologize for getting emotional. It's just a very, student mental health is very, and the way that we make sure they're taken care of and that the prevention and intervention is there is essential. And if we had that, I think that there would be less crisis need.
Okay, sorry. And so we have run out of our 5 minutes. I will entertain motions to extend, but I would like to remind people that we do have our guests. So for example, Curtis and Jessica have joined us in advance for 6:40, but we still need to hear Sergeant Rodriguez. So I'll entertain motions to extend, but I will put it to a vote at this time. Martha?
Can I make a motion to extend just for 2 minutes?
You can. Do I have a second?
Seconded.
All right. All right. All in favor, please raise your hands to extend for 2 minutes. Okay. Please lower your hands. All opposed? All right. 2 minutes. And then because you made the motion, I'll allow you to jump. Then it's Kevin and then Sal.
Okay. My question is for any of you guys who are working directly with students on campus. I know that the pandemic has put a lot of stress on us and has changed our world very much. And I appreciate you for being so open about your emotional space and how you feel about this. So thank you for that. Were you able to do any video counseling? I mean, were you able to meet those needs that way? I know that this won't last forever, but have your needs increased with the pandemic, I guess? And are you able to meet those needs with video counseling?
Can I answer that? We
I can answer that.
Okay. I do telehealth counseling. We have had an increase in my student population. It's often hard to get the students to agree or to log on. Sometimes they will, with the Google Voice number, I text them and I remind them. It just depends on their mood if we can get them on, but we keep trying and we keep trying. The groups are easier because they have an opportunity to interact with each other.
Thank you.
Can I respond as well? Is that okay?
Sure.
I'm a school counselor. I meet with students every single day. I have drop-in office hours for students to come in with quick questions, but I am making constant appointments with students to talk with them. And that can be a range of things. I am seeing a high emotional need in terms of isolation, loneliness, sadness, and just concerns that I have with regard to that. But counselors are outreaching to students every day and meeting with them every day.
I just really want to say thank you also.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And now we should move to Sergeant Rodriguez. And he is available for Q&A. So if you go to Exhibit B of your packet, so thank you everybody who joined us for the mental health professional as a guest. You're free and also encouraged to go about your regular day. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And Priya acknowledged on the hard stop, so we'll try to keep Sergeant Rodriguez to 20 minutes so that Jessica can speak afterwards. So now I'll go ahead and stop sharing. If you can turn to Exhibit B, the police department was kind enough to respond to our questions. And so we had a list of questions. We asked for more input, and that's a consolidated packet in Exhibit B. And so I'll entertain any follow-up Q&A for the sergeant. If you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Sergeant Rodriguez, and maybe, you know, make some introductory remarks, we'd really appreciate it.
Sure. Sorry, first time on Google Meet, so I'm getting to where all the buttons are. Thank you for having me. I'm Sergeant Mont Police Department. Let's see, I've been in charge of our school resource officer unit for the last 2 years. We have a great team here. We're just, we appreciate all the work you guys have done, and we're happy to have an opportunity to answer some questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I am presenting the screen just to familiarize yourselves, or just to familiarize you all with the responses, but I'll stop sharing my screen because I don't know that it's of much value while he fields. For now, if people would like to, you know, go ahead and get in queue, I'll be taking questions at this point. Samantha?
Sorry, I'm also familiarizing myself with the buttons. First of all, thank you so much for answering all of our questions, and I'm sending all that awesome information. I was reading through the superintendent's report from September 2018, which is in our data folder. And I was reading and I read that the SROs were supposed to attend a gender spectrum training in January of 2019. But I was looking through your training logs, the training logs of all the SROs that you also sent, and I couldn't find that training on there. I have the quote, one of my paper notes, if you would like me to read it, but I'm just wondering, like, what happened there? Is there training on cultural competency in like that regard, both like different ethnic cultures and like gender, LGBTQA, disability training, like all of that?
Yes, absolutely. So we actually did attend that training. We, instead of going to, I guess it was a specific training that the district was offering at different locations, we held it at our FUNAIA meetings. And I don't know if you're familiar with FUNAIA, but those are meetings that we hold throughout the school year here at the police department with representatives from all the different schools and the district offices, including Newark, Union City. And so we had them do the presentation for us at FUNAIA.
Thank you, Sergeant Rodriguez. And now I'll just read a question from the chat. In reference to question number 8, so let me refer back up to it. How long would it take to get arrest and demographic data, similar to the information that we have for 2018-19 and 2019-20 for the prior 5 years? And what about for the prior 10 years?
Right, so I think what was previously requested was the 10 years. And that information takes a tremendous amount of time because they actually have to appoint a staff person to go through every police report that's been taken out of school. It's not something that we keep like that. We actually have to go back and filter through that. And there's also a whole lot of different projects that are going on throughout the police department. And so they're busy as it is with other stuff as well. And so to fit that in and to go through every single report, it's going to take some significant time. I don't have that for you as far as how long that would take, but I have reached out to the unit that would handle that. They said there wasn't going to be enough time for them to complete that task. With the 5 years, it looks like you may have some of that information already. I believe there was a presentation done a few years back with some arrest statistics. So we just have to locate that information and we can get that over to you. But we're gonna have to dig a little bit to get all of that information. That's gonna be arrest. And then just the last 2 years that we've gone through alone, that took a significant amount of time to compile that information because like I said, somebody has to go through every single report, and the way the system's set up, they have to make sure that report was actually taken at the school and did involve a school-related matter rather than was it a late night patrol response to the school that didn't have anything to do with students or anything like that. So they do have to filter in and find that information.
Thank you. Kevin?
Hey, Sergeant Rodriguez. I just wanted to refer to question number 2, if possible. Within the question, within the answer, I think you referred to the limited response of mental health professionals outside of their fields. I am just wondering what the expertise of the SROs, the police officers, are. What gap are they filling outside of school safety? If you would want to answer.
Sure. We're not taking the role away from any other person. If there's a specialist in a field, by all means, if they're specialized in that topic, they're good to have there. What makes the SRO unique is that they have training in all aspects, and so they can respond to situations more quickly, because there are situations where if a student needs mental health services, the SRO is that quick response that's available to connect them to services. It's not that we are sitting there and counseling them. We're just determining how to connect them best with resources. And so it's more of a time issue. If they're available, and the most important thing is to get the student connected as quickly as possible, rather than having to sit and wait for another specialist to come by. It's more of a time issue, but they can transition to different roles because as you know, anything happens at a school, whether it be a medical emergency, well, they have training in first aid, in trauma. If that requires it, they have the ability to help out in that sense. Right? They're not taking the place of a doctor, because obviously the doctor is going to be a better role for that. But for the first immediate response for that, they're there and they can respond quickly, and they can also relay that information over the radio, provide information to the incoming first responders, your ambulance, your fire station. That's going to be helpful for them when they get there.
And Kevin, I'm just gonna just put you in the back of the queue. So let me go to Ty first, and then you can do your follow-up afterwards. So it's Ty, then Ganesh, and Kevin, then Marie Hughes. Oh, and I can just read your question, Ty. Are SROs specifically required, and are they trained in Title VI discrimination like other school staff?
They don't receive, so I can just respond to that. Do you have the question number?
No, this is a new question. It's in the chat. It's are SROs specifically required, and are they trained in Title VI discrimination like other school staff?
Title 6 or Title 11? So
Ganesh, you may want to go on mute.
I'm not aware of how the staff is trained, but like I said before, we've attended the gender spectrum training. We do go through, in the academy, they go through culture diversity. We do implicit bias training. We have various trainings throughout the year on different topics like that.
And then Ty, I would refer you to the training logs at the end, to the extent that it's not listed. Maybe you could follow up. Let me read Ganesh's, just because of the mic issue. When an SRO needs to leave campus for FPD meetings, department meetings, trainings, or other reasons, is a replacement officer stationed immediately? If not, how does FUSD or FPD deal with an emergency that occurs when an SRO is not on campus?
If a SRO is not on campus, so say for instance, they take the day off or whatnot, we try as best as possible to fill it with an overtime SRO or an officer that's going to fill that position for the day. If they need to leave campus, they typically have communication with the site administrators and let them know if they need to leave. They carry the school radios, so they're still in contact with what's going on at the school and are going to be able to respond if something needs, if they need the response, or they can coordinate on a radio to get responding units there, just as if there was any other school. So say for instance, an elementary school that didn't have them, they could respond and help them out hearing on the radio, or be able to communicate that assistance is needed at another school.
Thanks. Annie? And just for everyone else's information, we have 9 minutes left. I'm actually going to push follow-ups to the end to let any new speakers, sorry about that, Kevin, any new speakers speak. Go ahead, Annie.
Yeah, I was a little bit saddened to hear that you don't proactively keep data based. You will retroactively go back and look at that data. But speaking of data, my question is, beyond anecdotes, how do you measure the benefits of the SRO program? I know on this task force, we've been provided some limited access to data broken down by demographics. But where, if any, is there evidence, program evaluations, assessments, et cetera, measuring the impacts and the outcomes and the potential benefits, if any, of the SRO program beyond anecdotal data?
Well, I think to measure that, our job is tough to measure, but I think it's found in our relationships at the schools with the site administrators, with our response times, with the low arrest numbers and the low incidence of significant issues that have arose at the school. Keeping schools safe, that's a big measurement about our program and what we're there for. Leading into diversion, and are working in partnerships with the diversion program to get kids help they need, and are meeting with the district regularly to hear input from the sites or input about what's going on. I'm in regular communication with the district office as well as with the principals. If there's any issues, they would notify me. And then plus when we do the SRO evaluations, I reach out and get input from the sites to get what their thoughts are on their performance.
Thank you. And now I have Marie Hughes, then Priya, then Martha Krieger, then Kevin and Samantha Ching, and I'll slot Sal in there.
Okay, so my question is, I read the responses, and you were asked if you would be willing to be on campus without guns, and you said no, which I expected and understand. But I know that Fremont has community service officers, and I was wondering if they have access to the police radio, and would they be able to facilitate contact with the police department in an emergency?
They do have radios, and they do work with the police department in communicating. But then again, they don't have that immediate training to be able to go and respond to any emergency situation. They don't go through the academies. They don't go through law enforcement training or safety training. They don't have that same expertise. So it's just another, it would be another person there. But like I said, I think in my response, having someone to respond to something when a suspect's on scene, that's going to save time. And we know that the quickest that we can get involved with a situation like that and stop something, the more lives that are going to be saved.
Priya.
Hi, Sergeant Rodriguez. Thank you so much for coming today. So for question 16, in which you said that the district doesn't really have the ability to really replace an SRO, you also said that this hasn't really been an issue, so there wasn't really a discussion on the need for this process. However, one of the administrators that we interviewed said that there was an SRO at their school site that would handcuff students to chairs, and had administrator far
I had a question on question 5. In fact, that was really, really disruptive. And I really wish there had been a way to assess and evaluate and talk about getting rid of that officer, but we were unable to do that. So question 5, and reading that incident, it seems that the SRO actually made that situation more dangerous for students because the SRO didn't prevent the suspect from entering the campus and actually chased them through the campus. So I'm not sure that that really sounds like de-escalation to me or containment. It seems like he didn't even call for a lockdown at that time, and students were still walking through campus. So since you're assessing people's performance and job performance, et cetera, I mean, did this follow protocol? Was there de-escalation involved? And how did that look? And would it be able for the administrator to come back and say, this is not the way we want this done? Could we talk about retraining or getting together or getting a different officer or having a different relationship?
And just for clarity, Martha,
you, Mike. Sorry about that.
So that was
front of
just
you.
a little
I'm sorry.
background was a armed robbery with shots fired. The suspects ended up at the front of Robertson. The SRO was able to stop that vehicle and hold them at gunpoint, waiting for other officers to arrive. At which point, a suspect then left the car and immediately ran into the school. The officer recognized the danger of having a possibly armed suspect running into the school during school session, and these things happen within seconds. So he ran after him, making sure that if there was anybody in harm's way, that they were going to be able to address that situation. He ultimately caught up to the suspect and apprehended him. Had that SRO not been there, that suspect could have gone into a classroom. They could have done a whole slew of things, but within seconds, not calling it a lockdown, these things happened very quickly. And obviously his most important focus was getting this person in custody so there's no harm involved at the school.
So there was no lead into that. You didn't.
Sorry,
have-
Martha. No.
Sorry.
I can add you to the follow-ups. And then yes, we do have our Oakland Unified representatives. One of them at least that needs to leave at 7:05. But we have 1 minute and 40 seconds left. Sal.
Yeah, I have a question for Sergeant Rodriguez. First of all, thank you for your team service and the irreplaceable support you provide our students, staff, and community. Can you talk a little bit about the process used during student-involved incidences outside of school hours? What's the process you use and how is that communicated?
Could you be a little bit more specific? Are you asking about whether they can be referred to diversion or what other resources are involved?
No, things that would happen in the evening, things that would happen on a weekend, and they involve a Fremont Unified School District student.
So if something were to happen after hours, that information, that issue would be dealt with patrol units. That information usually gets relayed back to the SRO unit, so they're aware of what happened. If there's any follow-up, if there's potential dangers when they go back, if there's going to be anything that's going to affect the school as a result of whatever they were involved in. For instance, if there was a large fight after school hours and it involves students from a particular school, then that information gets relayed to the SRO, so then they can also make the school aware and people can be aware of potential issues that might arise when school is back in session.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have 6. So, should we? I'll let Jasmine go ahead if you want to make a quick question.
Okay, thank you. Really appreciate all the devotion of human beings that support students and mental health. So I just want to make that broadly. I'm curious, if there's anything as far as protocol when a police officer chooses a different path than a specialist is recommending that with the school?
Thank you. And that'll be the last question unless we extend time. Go ahead, Sergeant.
Are you referring to the 5150s?
5150s or any occasions when working with students?
Well, SRO is not going to take the place of a counselor. They're just an added resource. And I think what they talk about with the students are different than what necessarily a counselor would be discussing with them. So our SROs typically are reached out to talk about if they have issues that might be potentially police related at home, or if they're, if kids, it's about choice making and how to keep kids on the right track, the repercussions on if they make certain choices, right and wrong, and where that could lead them. Aside from that, with the 5150s, every SRO will make an assessment of whether they meet that criteria or not, and then make the determination on that. It's typically a collaboration with the counselor, with the site admin, whoever is involved with that situation. But they do have discussions amongst themselves and each other about how best to suit the student. But with liability reasons, if they meet the criteria for a 5150, they're going to handle it that way.
All right, thank you very much, Sergeant Rodriguez. I know that seeing no motions to extend for time, I'd like to now thank you, and we can go ahead and move to the next part of our agenda. Thank you so much for fielding our questions. We really appreciate it, and it assists us in our review.
Thank you.
Okay, and now I'd like to introduce Jessica Black. And has Curtis been able to rejoin us?
Curtis is not going to rejoin us.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and you have a hard stop in a few minutes, so we should. Okay, understood. So that may open up more time on our agenda for the other parts of it. But Jessica, if you wanted to just make some brief remarks, the reason I invited Oakland Unified is because I know that there's been some discussion about, what are logistics that we would have to implement if we decided to remove or modify the SRO program. And Oakland Unified on June 24th voted to remove their police department. So they don't just have an SRO program, but rather a whole department. And as I understand, at this point, you are working on a safety plan, is that correct? After having the board make that vote. So I just wanted to see in the brief time that we have you, if you could just share some logistics and other items either surprised by or want to communicate to our board and task force that are key to consider and think about.
Thank you for having me. So I am Jessica Black, and I'm with the Black Organizing Project, and we are the group who has ran a 10-year campaign called the Bettering Our School Systems campaign. We have done tremendous work around decriminalizing education for Black and Brown students, and most recently have got the George Floyd resolution to dismantle police from Oakland Unified School. I do want to say this first and foremost to your committee. The removal of police from schools is not a budget issue. It is a political and a moral issue. It was very clear that disproportionately Black and Brown students are arrested, and police do not equal safety and do not make our communities or our students feel safe in any way, shape, form, or fashion. We are currently at a time in this country where this country is evaluating its racist practices, specifically around anti-Blackness. So when you think about policing in the education system, a system that students are supposed to be able to go to and have loving and caring adults, but yet are met with criminalization and punitive behaviors, it is a problem. It is an issue. I will just say that first and foremost. So,
okay. Okay, so is it recorded now, please? Okay. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Antonio.
Oh, no problem. So if I could defer now to Marie and Priya, who can go ahead and share with us the campus security report. I'm going to find it in the agenda and share it with us. And if you could let me know when you want me to switch slides, that would be great. So let me just pop that up and also set the 20 minutes. Just 1 second. Chrome tab.
Okay.
All right. So I guess we can start with Priya, who did restorative practice research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, hi everyone. It's really nice to see everyone again. So part of campus security, I did research on restorative practices, and why this is relevant is because restorative practices are one of the resources that we have to make sure our school is safe, inclusive, and nurturing for all of our students. And it's also a resource that our district pays for, but we don't necessarily use as much as we could. It's also an alternative to traditional law enforcement, and it ensures that there's accountability for an offender, ensures that victims have a voice, and also that our community is also engaged in this process. And also it's one of the things that you need in order for students to feel like there's an adult on campus that they can trust and reach out to if something goes wrong before it escalates into something even larger. So there's a distinction between restorative practices and restorative justice. For convenience, I'm going to refer to both as RP, but they're both pieces of this. So restorative practices are what happens before. So it's preventative action that you use to actively build communities of respect between staff, between students, and between staff and students. And restorative justice is kind of afterwards. It's addressing the incidents and restoring wrongs after the fact. So FUSD had a task force that advocated for the implementation of a program from an outside provider called Circle Up. So for 2016 to 2017, Circle Up provided professional development to all the administrators and the certificated staff at Durham Elementary, Irvington, and Robertson. And because this was successful, it was renewed in 2017 to 2018 at all of those 3 pilot schools, but also Vallejo Mills and Thornton Junior High. So in addition to the training, Circle Up also had ongoing meetings, a train the trainer model, cultural sensitivity training, and resources on cultural competency. They maintain a rigorous evaluation process that allows the school sites to see how they've improved over time. But unfortunately, their contract was not renewed for 2018 to 2019. Robertson is an exception because they have Title I funds that let them stay in contract with Circle Up, and they still use Circle Up. So currently at FUSD, we have a contract with an IIRP, or the International Institute of Restorative Practices, and all the principals, assistant principals, counselors, and up to 3 teachers from the secondary school sites, and also Durham and Vallejo Mills elementary schools get a one-time training from IIRP. Just note that this is for those who are in the roles of fall 2018. The new staff haven't yet been trained, and the training that was scheduled for June 2020 was canceled. Also, SROs have not attended any of the training in restorative practices. So currently there's no protocol to monitor student outcomes for any disciplinary action. There's no review or evaluation process to track how effective the IIRP training is, and there's no board policy to mandate the use of restorative practices. The Office of Assessment and Accountability did determine some surveys that might be optimal metrics to measure the effectiveness, but those methods aren't being used by the district. I'm going to skip over these because we don't have much time. So our recommendations would be to first of all realize that it's no matter the amount of training, the effectiveness of restorative practices takes root with community building, a culture shift, and engagement. So so phase 1 might be training and practice for the administrators and all of the personnel at FUSD. And then phase 2 should be engaging the parents, engaging the students, and engaging community members. So that could take the form of presentations or assemblies, creating a student committee to assist admin. But in general, just actively working to create a culture in which the students and staff feel empowered to speak up when they see issues and hold each other accountable, because this is a long-term shift in culture that we need to continually practice, discuss, and evaluate. So school site administrators should work in collaboration with staff to create really well-defined goals, set an example for the staff, and also discuss restorative practices in staff meetings. The school site, other schools have had success with Murray, could you mute? Thank you. So other school sites have had success appointing a volunteer RP coordinator or committee to ensure that these practices are implemented just note that the roles and expectations need to be really well defined. And also there has to be some emphasis on cultural competency because the demographic of FUSD students is vastly different from the demographic of our teachers and our administrators, and there's some gaps of communication there. So in terms of training, every school site needs comprehensive training and practice for all FUSD personnel, so classified and certificated. The training should be conducted over the summer and personnel should be compensated for it. And because Circle Up has been really successful at Robertson, this kind of led to a recommendation to have the board possibly revisit IIRP as its outside vendor. But no matter what program is selected, the point is that it should be long-term. It should have an evaluation process. It should provide training to all of the personnel, and it should have additional assistance if the school sites need it. So for the evaluation process, this is kind of like a recurring theme we see with a lot of the things that we've been examining and part of our subcommittee and also like the larger task force is that the district doesn't have a lot of evaluation processes for many things. So for restorative practices, we hope that the district will regularly evaluate the implementation and the effectiveness, and that could mean quarterly benchmarks or oversight, and then the superintendent and the site administrators should work together to create measurable, accessible goals. So that could be benchmarks or surveys, and something really important would also be accountability for all the staff.
And I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Marie. There is mentions of board policy, but Priya, just for sake of time and so that we can definitely have discussion, I encourage everybody to read the rest of the report. And Marie, you want to go ahead?
Yes, I managed to unmute myself without leaving the meeting this time. So I mentioned in our last presentation that we felt like we were missing the point of view of the SROs and also students. So the rest of our report is to bring in some of their presentation. I talked to the SRO, I talked to the sergeant. We talked about lockdowns. You can read it here. We didn't have any recommendations around it, so I won't go through this slide. Next slide. So we did talk a lot about what happens if the student's going to be abused. And as was mentioned by Terry and the SRO, when there's an SRO on campus, the teachers tend to use that SRO and not go to Child Protective Services because they're there and because they're more responsive. And this, we had some issues with this. It seems like it's removing a tool to not have both be viable options. And in our recommendations, we talk about that. Next slide. Trespassing and unhoused is another area where the SROs were used quite a bit. Technically, the campus supervisor is actually in charge of trespassing and getting people off campus, but they'll call in the SRO if they can't do it, like if the person just won't leave. And the SROs deal a lot with trespassing by unhoused people. But all they do is get them off campus, which doesn't actually solve the problem because then they just come back. Next slide. And then we talked a little bit about fights, but we didn't have any recommendations here, so I'll skip it. You guys can read it later. Next slide. Okay, so my next thing that I did is I talked to a couple students. Then I guess the word got around, so some students started contacting me and I interviewed them. I sent a letter. And then I also went through all the public comments for the first two meetings, looking not for opinions, because we kind of know people's opinions, but for direct experiences with SROs. And I divide them into 3 buckets. So positive and they're in Appendix B, so you guys can all read them yourself. And if the experience was in the middle of opinions, I tried to pull it out, although sometimes I couldn't do that without losing context. So the athletic department loves the SROs. They feel like they're very, very helpful during games to prevent problems, and also if they can't prevent them, to deal with them after they happen. Staff also commented that, especially during the pandemic, they're on campus kind of by themselves, and sometimes they have unhoused people that they're afraid of, and the SROs will get rid of them. Make them leave campus. And then definitely we got a lot of comments that SROs on campus make students feel safe. However, only one of the comments was actually from a high school student. The rest were from elementary and middle schools. They don't have SROs. So I only put one comment in the Appendix B, but definitely we've heard that. When I interviewed students, they said their friends told them that. And there's obviously other positive ones, but they weren't in the comments or my interviews. Neutral. There were a lot of neutral interactions. They basically were summed up by one of the quotes in the appendix, which said, if SROs disappeared tomorrow, it would make absolutely no difference in my life. And like I said, there were a lot of these. Next slide. Negative interactions. These are more troubling, obviously, and they ran the gamut from SROs on campus make me uncomfortable, all the way up to, actually had an SRO be violent with me. The other thing is when I interviewed some of the students, they said when their parents were upset and they wanted to complain, they said there wasn't a way to complain. We know now there is, but they clearly didn't know how to complain. And we'll deal with that in our recommendations. Next slide.
Just to be clear, you're referring to making a complaint?
Yeah, making a complaint against the SROs. Apparently people just don't understand that they can do that by going to the police department. So I put all the negative interactions into buckets. And I have some quotes here. I won't read everything, but so some things where SROs were escalating the situation or maybe being overly aggressive. There were a couple comments about SROs targeting me or my friends because of race. Next slide. There was a bunch of comments about being focused on things that they weren't supposed to, like the dress code. And then mental health issues. So there were definitely some negative comments about how they made the situation work. At this point, I want to direct you to Appendix C, the letter I got from one of the students. And the reason is because in the video that the police department sent us, Officer Candler made a comment of how he gets involved with student lives for dealing for things like mental health. And he said, whether the families want me to or not. And when he said that, I was like, well, what does that mean? And then I got this letter, and this is just one student's story, but this is how the SRO got involved in her family life. I won't read the whole thing, but I will read this one paragraph. As I began struggling with these mental health issues, the SRO became increasingly involved in my life. He would check up on my house and harass my parents to force me to come to school. He would also follow my parents when they dropped my sister and me off at school. Every time I had an anxiety attack at school, which at one point was daily, he would be notified, but did little to help besides stand outside the door while the single school counselor at the time tried to help me. And then you can read the rest yourself, but it ends with the SRO putting her into a 5150 against the direct advice of her mental health counselor. So, recommendations. For the CPS, we would like the district to work with CPS to make that process be a real choice for mandatory reporters. There may be instances where a teacher doesn't want, or a counselor doesn't want to go to an SRO. Maybe that's the person who's doing the thing. And so CPS has to be a real option. We would like them to adopt a policy that the first step when there are unhoused people loitering on campus is to call human services and only involve law enforcement at human services direction, or if that doesn't work. And then hopefully that way they'll get into services and they won't come back. The complaint process needs to be more transparent, and FUSD has to play a role in the process. Right now, you go to the police department. It's the sergeant told me it's treated as an internal personnel matter, which means the school district doesn't even know about it. And we would like the school site safety team to evaluate on-campus law enforcement interactions annually. And we would like this evaluation to survey all the stakeholders. So that would be students, staff, and their parents. And then finally, we would like the memo of understanding for this district to have a provision to be able to remove or replace SROs from the site at their option. So we don't have any recommendations about mental health because we have a mental health committee, and they're going to have recommendations after my presentation. I do want to say that all of our recommendations for both for restorative practices and these recommendations were passed unanimously by our committee.
All right, thank you very much. And now we open it up to discussion, debate, and then at the end of the time, obviously people can accelerate it. We would adopt the report. So Kevin, go ahead. Sorry, Kevin, you're on. Go ahead.
Yeah, is it working now? Yep. All right, awesome. I just wanted to ask Ms. Hughes about the involvement of SROs in athletic events. It seems very telling to me that the amount of respect for SROs increases with more aggressive, like bigger people, perhaps in athletics. Would you say that the key importance of SROs there is to have more brute force? Was that part of any testimonies that you had with the athletics departments in handling situations and altercations in sports?
Yeah, so not that didn't come up. The main thing seemed to be that just the presence of an armed officer, you know, with his vest and a bully club and big, right, seemed to prevent fights. So my understanding is that sometimes like one side wins and one side loses, and then they get upset. And just having them there kind of makes students less likely to get into it.
I see. I also wanted to ask if the athletic department ever reported any instances of the SRO getting hands-on, ever having to use that force, that show of force,
Right.
on the students.
Yeah, no, their comment, you can read their comment. It's very effusive. However, there is a comment, or actually from one of my interviews, I had a comment where a student felt that when an SRO was breaking up a fight, that they were overly aggressive, that the first thing they went to was tackling the students and didn't try some other things like talking to them.
And I would refer all committee members to the extensive public comment that we've received. So this should be available to all task force members. A point of personal privilege, Jasmine. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes. Sorry about that. I just wanted to raise concern about the recording. If perhaps maybe in the future 2 or 3 people can be recording it at the same time in case it goes down. I am particularly upset that portion of tonight's meeting was not recorded.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I appreciate that. Luis, could you coordinate with Greg after the meeting to address that concern? I will take your silence as a yes. Sal?
Yeah, I want to start by saying that I was on that committee, and I was one of the 5-0 votes for the recommendations. There's a lot of discussion that happened with those slides, however. So when we look at implementing RP, it's a cost, and there needs to be a culture and structure shift before this even works. It's not about, okay, I'm going to train all these people and it's going to happen. That's not the way it works. When we deal with people on our site, we're dealing with CSEA, FUDTA, SEIU, FSMA. So we're dealing with multiple folks that may not believe in this. And there's nothing written anywhere that says they would have to do it. It's a culture shift. So for it to be successful, that shift would have to happen. But when we talk about people, these are things that also need to be considered, because there was training. We've had training as a site. I mean, the last 5 years, there's been portions of training, and I would question the implementation in every site. And then I would also ask, where were those obstacles? Were folks willing to repair harm, and at what level? The last thing I want to make a comment to is most staff, when they are given some information that are going to require them to be a mandated reporter, you would be surprised how easy for them it would be to have them either go see the principal, to go talk to the SRO. They do that. And as much as I would open up and I support the option for them to, make that report themselves, I can tell you it doesn't happen.
Wrap up just because we're out of time if you want to finish that.
So my point is staff will, in my experience, the staff went to the SRO and principal to report.
Thank you so much, Sal. So we're out of time. So I don't take motions in the chat, but I will Ganesh, if you want to turn on video. Okay, never mind. I now, for Ganesh, I will take motions in the chat because of his mic issues. So how much time?
2 minutes.
Flip fingers. All right, great. Thank you. All right, so motion to add 2 minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, I hear a second. So all in favor, please turn on your videos if you can and raise your hand. So if you're in favor. All right, please put your hands down. And then all opposed, please raise your hand. Thank you very much. And I see the votes in the chat, so I'm going to add 2 minutes. Go ahead, Ganesh.
I don't have a question. I could see some questions coming in, so I put that motion out.
Okay, you will definitely have to try to log in again or change a mic, maybe? Maybe call in. And Greg, could you make me a host, please? So I can mute people. All right. Any other comments?
Yeah, I indicated via chat.
Okay, great. Annie, go ahead.
Yeah, two separate reasons that I raised my hand. First of which being, in part, I agree with Sal. It is a culture shift, but that doesn't mean that we should throw up our hands and do nothing. I think we should try. And you're right, a lot of things aren't written down. We've run into that problem time and time again while performing this review, when we ask, okay, is there a list of X? Is there a list of Y? No, nothing's written down. Yeah, we probably need to write more things down. Second reason is a member of the public actually just reached out to me saying that not only did the live stream cut out shortly after Jessica started speaking, but it also cut out shortly after Priya started asking a question about an SRO handcuffing students to chairs. And I find this frankly alarming, to be honest. We need to make sure that these are recorded so the public gets an accurate picture of the whole meeting and stuff doesn't get cut out, especially stuff when people are making comments or questions that may be critical to SROs.
Thank you. And I recognize that, and I will work with Greg and Luis to ensure that we have that we can address that. And that is something also that we could potentially discuss during next steps. So we are now out of time. Seeing no motions to extend, we'll go ahead and vote to adopt the report. So all in favor of adopting the campus security report, please raise your hands. Thank you so much. Please lower your hands. All opposed? Okay, the ayes have it with 3 voting against. Do you have a clarifying question, Sal?
Yeah, I support the recommendation page. The other stuff is, and I share this throughout the day-to-day in email. So,
all right, so a clarifying question, but definitely during debate you can express that. But I believe Sal's point is he supports the recommendations, but he is voting against the report.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so now we move to let's see. Just 1 second. I've already canceled presenting. So we are at, I'm going to the agenda. We're now at mental health. So actually, I will do a quick summary of the meeting, and I encourage any of the other mental health sub-task force members to jump in at any time. But let me pull that up. So if everybody could go to Exhibit E. It's a pretty short slide deck, so hopefully there'll be time to discuss, debate, etc. Ganesh, it's okay, thanks. And Greg, you're not able to make me host? No?
No, I can't. But is Ganesh trying to call in? Because I have a number requesting access to join.
Yes, that's right. He is. He's stated as such in the chat.
If he could try again, I'll let him in.
Okay, thank you very much. So just a quick, so everybody should be able to access the counseling and SROs section, but I will present it for the benefit of anyone watching. So let me just find it. So it's a PDF format, so unfortunately, I can't present it, if you will. So we were tasked with reviewing SROs acting as counselors as a result of discussions that happened in the interactions committee. And mental health was specifically asked to do this because of that counseling role. And so under NASRO, which is the National Association of SROs, SROs subscribe to a triad model of responsibility. So they have 3 job duties, essentially, as described by NASRO. One of them is law enforcer or law enforcement personnel. The other one is an informal counselor and an educator. So think of presentations on vaping, etc. Others have described this counseling role as street level law related counseling or law counseling, which is a narrower scope. But NASRO, which I imagine is kind of the guiding force, describes it as informal counseling. Now, to remind you all, the genesis of the discussion was that from discussions in interactions, site administration representatives did state that SROs are used in a non-law enforcement capacity, and they justify their presence in a room under a counseling role. So for example, while a principal will not call on law enforcement to speak with a student for failing to follow school rules or for using profanity, they may bring in an SRO to discuss the issue with the student in a counseling capacity. And there was a discussion about, that SRO may just be present, silent, listening, and that they would be doing that under counseling. And now I would refer you to the slide from the interactions report. So if you recall, with one of the site administrator representatives, let me actually make this bigger. That might help. With one of the site administrator representatives, they kind of described what events would justify the use of law enforcement, but we should recall that there is currently no board policy or guidance on when it is appropriate or not appropriate to use law enforcement. And so what would, instances that would potentially involve law enforcement would be loitering, disorderly conduct, trespassing, possession of a toy gun. And then it could involve law enforcement, depending on the circumstances, for things like possession of alcohol, basically gang behavior, perceived drunkenness, etc. And then the district does not agree that it is appropriate to involve law enforcement for this list over here. For example, the inappropriate use of electronic devices, profanity, failure to follow school rules, etc. Now, the issues that we explored at the sub-task force level is that site administrators may prefer to have a point person when it comes to student issues, whatever they be. And so that can be an SRO, for example, that is present at secondary sites or high schools. And that SROs can fill in gaps that administration, site administration, or that the board creates due to other priorities that they may have or budget cuts. And we discussed the training. So SROs do not have the training that counselors, school psychologists, nurses, social workers, or behavior specialists have. SROs typically receive 40 to 60 hours of annual training, and it's unclear how much of it is counseling related, but this doesn't compare to the career's worth of preparation for mental health professionals. Also, police officers cannot keep a student's confidence, especially if the student informs them of criminal behavior. And essentially, this counseling role serves as a backdoor to encourage law enforcement involvement for school discipline issues. And we reviewed Section 3F9 of the MOU, which states that SROs should not be involved in enforcing matters that are routinely school discipline related. And you can go ahead and click on the link to review that language in the MOU. And I'm about to be done. So the adopted recommendation we made was that law enforcement personnel should not be involved in an informal counseling, mentoring, or teaching capacity with students. And this is generally done at the site at the direction of site administration, where a student is not free to leave. However, we encourage students to seek out positive relationships with all adults on campus, including law enforcement personnel, of their own accord. And we specifically carve out any group presentations, like, for example, the vaping presentation that we talked about earlier. And the discussion around that, I'll leave that to you. That's what guided our recommendation. And so now I would like to open it up for discussion and debate. Trustee Jones.
Yeah, I have a question when it comes to enforcing school rules, because we heard from Marie that some students were reporting that SROs were monitoring for dress code. And, you know, it's my understanding we currently don't have a policy that would prevent SROs from being involved in school discipline issues. But I would like to point out the answer to number 15 that was posed to the SROs about are SROs involved in enforcing dress code in any way. And it says SROs are not involved in school discipline matters. So I'm finding a disconnect there a little bit, and maybe it's site specific. I don't know if Sal or Brian has any insight into, you know, why it seems that at least in our students are reporting that there may be some involvement with SROs with school discipline issues.
And I'll
like
defer
dress
to it. Thank you, Trustee Jones. And Brian raised his hand. Go ahead, Brian, and then I'll move to Sal.
Thanks, Antonio. As far as my experience in doing summer school principal in many sites, and also the sites I've been an administrator, I've never had SROs enforce dress code. They just, that's not their rule.
Thank you. And now move to Sal.
Yeah, in terms of enforcement, there's a difference between enforcement and involvement. So depending on the circumstance, a lot of these different pieces, they're not going to be involved in dress codes per se. Maybe 10 years ago, 8 years ago, I would say they would be involved because we had a high population of red and blue on campuses. So they were involved from the gang perspective lens in terms of dress code. But when we're talking simple dress code, that's something that a site administration will deal with. But when we're talking, you know, gang, and, you know, I've been in the district since 1999, and we had a big and red blue population, probably my first 15 years there. And they were, I would involve, as would my colleagues involved, when circumstances arose around that kind of dress code violation.
Okay, I definitely understand that, but I think in some of the public comments we received, and definitely in some of the emails that I think trustees have received, and it's hard to put a timestamp on when this may have occurred, but it sounds like some of our students or former students have reported involvement with dress code that didn't relate to gang colors. And I'm just wondering, you know, like I said, I think it's unclear to me how long ago that may have happened, but it does appear that it did happen at least one at a certain time frame. And I guess I would want clarification that that is not happening now.
Well, if I may, Trustee Jones, if I could just share this tab instead, in part because of your first comment about how there is no board policy on that. The MOU language, I think, is instructive. And so section 9, that SROs must refrain from taking enforcement action resulting from formal school discipline situations that are generally the responsibility of school administrators, such as dress code infractions. Obviously, you're speaking to the actual practice, but while there is no board policy, the agreement governing our relationship specifically speaks as to this. Sal, you had a follow-up? Actually, Martha wanted to jump in, and then I'll take Sal, assuming there's no other speakers.
Well, I was just going to say that I was actually asked to come into my local high school and talk to an English class about gender bias. We were talking about gender bias in terms of the dress code. And there were kids in that class, young women, who were talking about how humiliating it had been that year to get a dress code, a red card or whatever that is, involving their and having to go to the office and get different clothing or go home and change. So I don't know. I think there are actually reports of that happening. So I didn't realize until you guys said it wasn't policy, and the teacher in the class didn't realize it wasn't policy either. So I'm not sure that's well, what do you call it when you tell people what is true and what is not? I'm not sure the kids know what their rights are.
Thank you. And Ganesh, you had a comment? Are you trying to unmute under your phone? Can you unmute Greg, his phone? No, you can't. All right, Ganesh, you are not able to fully participate in our meeting. I'm sorry for that. If you want to type it out, I would appreciate it. Sal?
Yeah, I would just like to comment in terms of, the progression of addressing dress code. Typically, an administrator wouldn't see it initially. It would be the classroom teacher or a campus supervisor that would identify a violation of a dress code. So all I would ask is maybe taking a look at all the schools' dress code policies that are in the student handbook, because I can promise you 99% of the initial response is coming from a staff member that's enforcing a dress code policy that's stated in a student handbook.
I would add one point. So I'm going to take Marie Hughes' comment and then Kevin's. I would note that it doesn't seem like the MOU is a living document, one that is shared or known of broadly. So I think that may be important for site staff to have. So Marie?
I just wanted to say that I support the recommendation to have SROs not involved in counseling. We have seen that they do not have the training that counselors have, and we have seen that it can go very, very badly because of that. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Kevin?
Yes, I think there was a discussion going on in the chat, or Mr. Herrera was mentioning perhaps about gang colors. I am wondering I'm wondering if it's a matter of perspective bias that you might end up wrongly criminalizing some people who were wearing gang colors, whether there are ever problems of that, where there, it feels like a self-fulfilling prophecy in that we have a police officer meant to identify red and blue issues or like gang colors, and then actively criminalize and report them, give them red cards. Or
Thank you. And then Ganesh's comments regarding counseling, the sergeant said they don't sit down and counsel, but in the Fremont Police Department's video, Irvington High School's SRO is seen doing just that, and they refer to themselves as the sixth counselor. Also, a parent comment at IHS pointed to the IHS SRO video asking students to reach out in case of depression. And so if you refer to the wellness website, that's where that video is hosted for IHS. Sal, oh, and also Trustee Campbell, did you want to speak, or was that a comment just in the chat?
Sorry, I had to unmute. It was just a comment just in the chat that, while we may be getting comments about dress code, it could be because of a gang color. People don't necessarily say. They just say, I got in trouble because of a dress code. Well, what was the dress code? They haven't really seriously identified what that means. And the board policy there is a board policy about dress code. So, but it doesn't specifically say that SROs are allowed to be part of the enforcement in the administrative regulations. Thank you.
We are now out of time. So I'll take a motion. Martha?
Can I make a motion to extend time by 2 minutes?
Do I have a second?
I second that.
Great. All in favor, please raise your hands. Please lower your hands. All opposed, please raise your hands. All right, the ayes have it. So I'll add 2 minutes. And then Martha, if you want to go ahead and speak because you made the motion.
So I really want to speak to the fact that I think that we really need to keep SROs from counseling since they don't have that background. I think a lot of what I witnessed when I was working with kids at Mission and just being with kids at Mission was there was a lot of trauma-induced behavior. There was a lot of need for counseling. There was a lot of those issues. And I think if you're expecting kids to self-select and say, yes, I'm depressed today or I'm upset, and then voluntarily go in for counselors who are clearly overworked, who don't have time to do that. And I think that that's a very difficult ask. And if you're asking people who have been traumatized to speak to a uniformed officer who is somewhat intimidating and armed, I think you're really asking for too much. And I think if you're looking at an entire group of 2,500 kids, you're leaving out a lot of issues that could be taken care of in other ways with social workers, counseling, and other emotional supports, which I really hope the district is able to do.
Thank you, Martha. And Sal, did you have a comment?
Yes, I did. I wanted to talk, well, now I'll talk on Marie and Martha's statement. Again, I would push back against administration discretion, because what you're saying is you want to limit the administrator's ability to use the resources on their campus. There are many kids on our campuses that have relationships with our SROs, and is it going to be therapeutical counseling? No. And there's not a lot of that that's going on campuses at this point anyways, because there's so many layers of issues that some of our kids come with, but it's more of just being able to listen. But when you say a SRO should not be able to, you got to remember that they work under the direction of the site administrator. And if they have a relationship and the site administrator believes it would be a good conversation, if the kid didn't want to be there, of course, that wouldn't even be an option. But to have that option as a site administrator, I would not want that to be taken away from me.
Thank you. And if I could,
sorry, are you saying they have the option to leave when you're talking to them?
Sorry, we're out of time, and I don't want to encourage direct debate or discussion. So now, Annie, is that a motion?
Yeah, motion to extend time by 1 minute.
All right, do we have a second? All right, we have a second. All in favor, please raise your hands. Please lower your hands. All opposed? The ayes have it. Go ahead, Annie.
Great. Yeah, that is, Sal, in fact, is why the motion says where a student is not free to leave. So if a student would like to seek out a positive relationship with law enforcement personnel, that's great. The adopted recommendation doesn't prevent that in any way, but there's a large power imbalance when a student is not free to leave, or when an administrator says you need to sit down and have a counseling conversation with an SRO, or a counseling conversation is going to occur and the SRO with their gun is going to go stand there in the corner. There's a large power imbalance there. And that's not to prevent a student from, of their own accord, going to seek out a relationship with an SRO or a teacher or a janitor, for that matter. But not all. I know you talk a lot about having all the resources at your disposal, but not all resources are appropriate for all situations. I think counseling is absolutely essential. I think that it's really, really, really good and really important. But other personnel, other counselors have been trained for years and years and years on how to counsel, so they should take the lead on counseling.
Thank you, Annie. And so if we could, seeing no other motions, I'm going to stop presenting. If we could go ahead and vote to adopt the report. So all in favor, please raise your hands. Great. So please lower your hands. All opposed? All right. The ayes have it with 4 opposed. Thank you very much. All right. So now we can move to the part of the agenda. Sorry, just one second. We are at data. So this is a 5-minute presentation, and I'll defer to Samantha for both data and administrative survey. Go ahead, Samantha.
Hi, I think, okay, there we go. Sorry, my Google Meet was like lagging out. Just quick data report. First of all, data sent a letter out to Sergeant Rodriguez addressing the data requested, or the data requests that we had. Initially, we sent out this request with the sergeant questionnaire on the 12th of October. However, as stated in that report or his responses, they didn't have time to compile that data for us. So we sent another letter to formally request these pieces. And I will point out that in that letter, we cite an example of, oh, here it is. Hello, letter. We cite an example of data that FPD was able to provide the district in 2018 that was broken down by demographics and high schools. So it's definitely something that exists and is plausible. So we look forward to receiving that data when FPD is able to get back to us, and whatever data they can provide, because at the end of the day, this data is essential to this task force being able to prove that Fremont Unified is an exception to national statistics, right? If we don't have this data, we cannot make that claim. So yeah, that's kind of like the brunt of it. We've narrowed it down to 2 years versus or 3 to 2 years, depending on the data request itself, instead of the original 10 or 5. So hopefully we get that data so we can share it with all of you. The other part of the data report is that the Gen Up survey did get sent out, I believe, on Monday. So thank you to the district team for being able to do that. We were also able to send out translated versions, both in Mandarin and in Spanish. So we're really giving access to a whole host of populations. What I will say is right now, most of the responses are from parents. So if we could increase the push to other stakeholders, that would be really beneficial as well to see the data across the board.
Thanks, Samantha. If I can go ahead before you move to administrative survey, Trustee Jones.
Yeah, I think the data that we already have, the arrest data with the demographic breakdown of that, we already have it for 1920 and for the prior year, 1819. So I would really like to see at least 5 years of that data. I think it's tough when we only have 2 years of data and we see a disproportionate impact to a particular group. And there's been an explanation that in one of the years that was related to a single fight, but that doesn't explain the other year. And so it's really hard to make a determination based on just 2 years. And even if that information is not available for the task force, I am very much hoping that it can be available to the board by the November meeting, because that is something that's going to be really important for us. I think you're exactly right, Samantha. It's hard to determine whether or not we are an exception to national data when we don't have the local data. That's going to be really critical for us. You know, and I'm hoping that, given the answer to another question that was submitted, that the SROs that the FPD can find the time to give us this data. If time can be allocated to another endeavor, I'm hoping it can be allocated to this.
And just as a clarifying point, the request that the data team sent out is asking for the past 3 school years broken out by demographics and campus. So we would have one of those years for 2017-18, but we are missing 2018-19, 2019-20. broken out by campus. We did get demographics, but we don't have campus. So the data team has limited its request for that. There is no data on number of admonishments. And in fact, that may have been new to many of us task force members until it was presented in the Fremont Police Department's video on the SRO benefits. And so that's another key point to break out by demographics in campus. We have no idea what number of admonishments Fremont students have received. And also, while we received data for documented reports, and that's the CPC, California Penal Code incidents for the past 2 years, they have no demographics, and it's really unclear what those incidents represent. If they didn't lead to arrests, what did that mean? So that's wraps up our time for data, and that was more of an update, so there is no report, as the letter has already been sent out to the sergeant. But Samantha, if you want to go ahead and update us on the administrative survey, let me find it real quick.
Yeah, okay. We have 5 minutes. All right, so let's get to this. First of all, I'd like to thank Greg for really helping us out and sending this survey out to all administrators in Fremont Unified. It was awesome. That first day we got so many responses. This report that I'm going to be presenting in just a few moments is based off of 50 responses of both principals and assistant principals in the district. Also a big thank you to the team that compiled this. There was 10 of us, 10 volunteers from the task force, including Sal, who is a principal. So he gave us a lot of great input. Yes. So I guess we'll just go through the data then. This is a preliminary report, so it doesn't have everything. I just had to compile it very quickly. So here we have our first question is, wait, oh, I think I've misordered these slides. So if you want to go down to the second one or the next one first. So this is our sample population, which is the percentage of principals and assistant principals that we asked, and then also the breakdown of different campuses that these administrators serve. So you see it's a widespread, but I just wanted to clarify this to make sure that it was clear who we were asking, with the goal of understanding the function of SROs and how these administrators are interacting with these personnel. One of our questions was, do you contact parents or guardians when SROs are involved with student-focused incidents unrelated to parental abuse or abuse, anything that would require CPS involvement? And we can see here that it's kind of a mixed bag. 54% said always, but then there's the other portion of it is like often, sometimes, rarely, never. And then we followed anything besides never. When do you contact parents? And again, we'll see kind of a split of like when. We have 4 before investigation, once an SRO is involved. Most of the responses said during questioning or investigation. There were some that stated it was after an investigation or once the outcome is clear. One specific response said that after an ambulance took a student, or after an ambulance takes a student away in a 5150 situation, that's when they would call parents. Just for full disclosure in terms of like what outcomes implies. One principal or one administrator said that they would call parents at the end of the day, or when the investigation was over, depending on what came first. And then also, it largely depends on situation. It's kind of like what we can take away from this chart. The next section is if your school site does not have SROs on site, so elementary schools, middle schools. In what situations would you utilize SROs? And this is kind of a breakdown. I tried to fit it all on one slide, couldn't do it. So here's a list of the different way or reasons why an elementary school administrator or a middle school administrator would call an SRO according to the responses. And I've pulled some quotes to kind of give examples. So we have student behavior, which would be students threatening or harming themselves, habitually late student, any attendance issues, discipline, student suspensions, welfare checks, so SROs going to homes to check on a student or a family, CPS or Child Protective Service related issues, any restraining order violations or restraining order issues. Community outreach, specifically cited was building bridges, the Run, Fight, Hide presentation, classroom lessons. One administrator specifically cited a kindergarten class lesson, and then handing out candy at Halloween, which is like, it's October, right? So it's like a seasonal, or on, relevant. The next would be 5150 holds, sexual harassment issues, both online and in person, a fleeing child, which means that the student has left the campus.
Samantha, sorry to interrupt because we're down to 45 seconds.
Oh gosh.
It was my mistake to not allot more time for this. I didn't realize Samantha would do this great of a job on summarizing the results. So I kind of want to ask the committee if they'd like to spend more time, kind of reviewing the results. If so, I'd like to entertain a motion for some amount of time. Samantha, do you have a recommendation to the task force?
No, this is purely just to report on data. And this is also preliminary.
No, my question is, do you have a recommendation on the amount of time that you'd like?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been talking really fast and I'm about halfway through, so I would probably say another 5 minutes, and then if we wanted to have questions, 6 minutes, but that's up to the task force.
Let's do I'm going to interpret that as a motion for 6 minutes of time. Do I have a second?
I second.
Second.
All right, all in favor of 6 more minutes of the admin survey? Great. Lower your hands. All opposed? All right, I'm actually going to remember to put the time. Go ahead.
All right. Cool. So going back to situations, concerns with parental behavior. So any custody issues when it comes to parent pick or student pickup, any threatening emails from a parent, and then repeatedly, ignoring parking signs. Oh, I should have put that in the traffic enforcement, but that is also in traffic enforcement. Another issue that SROs would be involved in would be traffic enforcement, drop-off and pickup times, again, repeatedly ignoring parking signs. Illegal behavior such as vandalism or found illegal substances, and then strangers on campus, either the homeless, unhoused population, disruptive visitors, or well, these are all pulled quotes, transients on campus. And then last but not least, counseling students, such as speaking with students headed in the wrong direction, proactive interventions with single students or with classes. And again, I must repeat that these are all pulled quotes. This is the chart breakdown of the data. Multiple responses, most responses had multiple tags in them. So if all of these extend beyond 50, that is why. I believe this data itself was based on 32 responses. And again, they had multiple responses, and there are situations. So we see that for the most part, these situations are 5150s or illegal behavior. Illegal ranging from a great vast amount of situations such as illegal substances, or I think that, I don't remember, let me see, what did I say? Or vandalism, sorry. And we can kind of see it's across the board too in terms of how administrators are using SROs when they are not on site. Next slide, please. The next question we asked was, how often do SROs act at your direction? And again, this is a pretty mixed bag. We have some always, most of the responses said mostly at the direction of the administrators, but we had a couple that said SROs act independently, and then 28% stated that they don't interact regularly with SROs, which I'm assuming, or actually we can go check, and that would be like elementary, middle school, the sites that don't have SROs. But one might say that those administrators still interact with SROs and thus would have answered differently. The follow-up question to this was, if SROs act at the direction of other individuals, who are those individuals? Again, very mixed bag here. There's some admin that said district office, youth and family services, police department, the police department itself, other staff, such as the secretary or counselors, Parents, I don't know, 2 people responded with parents. I'm not really sure what that was, but I had to put it in here because that is the data. And then there were some responses of not sure, like who is in charge of that. And this question was, oh yeah, this was, I believe this was not required, but I could be wrong with that. The next section is kind of like the chunkiest part. We did provide a matrix that would kind of survey the functions of the SROs and how often they were used by admin.
And Samantha, you have 2.5 minutes.
So I guess we can just stare at these. 5150s had a large spike of always. Mental health services without that are non-5150s is mostly never. But again, mixed bag. That's kind of what we can tell from a lot of these charts, that there is no uniformity to it. But I'm sure, again, this is a lot to do with it's like situational experiences or whatnot. These are all attached to the agenda. So if you want to spend your time perusing this data, it'll be there. How do you measure the impact and outcomes of the SRO program beyond anecdotal data? Again, mixed bag. So data from Fremont Police Department, response time, number of suspensions and behavior reports, number of 5150s, academic progress, attendance rate, observational. So if, like, I recall one administrator sending in that they would see students going up to SROs during sports games, and that would be like one example of a positive observation. An SRO survey, so surveys to the students and parents about the SRO, the Healthy Kids survey, and then none or unknown, which was a large portion of the responses. And this was based on 50 responses with multiple methods per response. Yes, the functions were based off of a matrix. This is the last slide. This is, are you in favor of continuing the FUSD SRO program or replacing it with other types of resources, such as mental health providers, social workers, etc.? 74% of administrators said that they were in favor of continuing the FUSD SRO program. 14% said they would reform it in some way. 10% were in favor of replacing the program, and 2% or 1% said that they did not know. And
Thank you.
that's the presentation.
I have 20 seconds for questions or comments. Let me stop presenting.
Oh, I'm out of breath.
All right, seeing none, we will move on to the next part of the agenda. Thank you so much, Samantha. And again, I did not expect that quality of work product, so I did not give you enough time. I'm sorry. And we are now at the general review of methodology. So and this is a discussion I just wanted to go over for the benefit of this group, as well as for the benefit of the public, what work has gone into. Oh yeah, to be clear, that's an excellent job, Samantha. So if you go to Exhibit H, and I'll go ahead and share screen quickly. Let me add 6 minutes because I've been speaking for a minute. Let me share my screen. Nope, that's not it. Is that it? Yeah, that is it. All right. So, this is the work that has gone into the SRO Task Force's review. So we've had 4 meetings, right? So we started in September 24th. We broke up into various sub-task forces at that time. And then we provided a questionnaire following the second meeting, which happened on October 8th. And we looked to coordinate to find outside speakers, which we heard from today. So we had the mental health professionals to begin today's meeting. We had Sergeant Mike Rodriguez to field any follow-up Q&A from that long list of questions that we provided him. And we also invited Oakland Unified representatives. And then obviously we have pending our meeting on October 29th. In campus security, they met, I believe, 3 times. And now these might be under reporting. I tried to aggregate it from meetings that I'd attended in my calendar and reached out to data since I'm not on that sub-task force. They met originally on September 30th, and they reviewed the necessary information to prepare their report. They did a series of interviews and they researched restorative practices extensively. Sorry, just one second. Thank you. And so they did an extensive interview process in order to present to us on restorative practices today. And then on the 21st of October, they voted on the second report that was approved again today. In mental health, they started meeting very quickly in September 28th. They prepared an initial report, and that had really to do, and there was outreach to the various mobile crisis teams, and they received the crisis response handbook. They adopted the report at a meeting on October 3rd in advance of that wider task force meeting, which happened October 8th. They prepared a recommendation on SRO counseling, which obviously we received today and adopted. And we attempted to interview the SRO from Irvington High, but the timing didn't work out. And so as a result, we weren't able to do so. And we coordinated the logistics of the mental health professionals that presented today. Interactions met on the 29th. They reviewed interactions between staff and SROs, students and SROs, staff and students, and the community and SROs. Then they, on the 2nd of October, they reviewed and adopted model board policies on questioning and arrests, which subsequently this task force adopted. And they adopted their report on a meeting on October 7th. Data met or voted on 4 dates, starting in September 28th. They discussed data collection methodology. They generated a list of guiding questions and assigned subtask force report writers. Then on October 6th, they recommended the distribution of the GENIP survey, which is currently outstanding, and will be provided to the data subtask force to analyze. And that the importance of that was that it was disaggregated by race, gender, disability status, socioeconomic class, and other relevant categories. Excuse me. And they reviewed the interim results of the survey. I've yet to do that, to send to Samantha so that she can send to data. And then they approved sending the Fremont Police Department that follow-up letter, which was part of our meeting today. Then lastly, of course, the admin survey team met. It seems like they met 3 times in order to put out this high quality survey. And I encourage you all to review it at your leisure. Does anybody have any questions on the methodology? I know many of us were obviously active and participating in all of these steps, but I certainly wanted to show the breadth of work that we've all done. I know it's been a hectic series of weeks for many of us. So I really want to extend my gratitude to all of you who are putting in tremendous amounts of time and participation that we get to see at these various task force meetings. Sal?
Well, I didn't win the lottery on Saturday, so I just wanted to say that. If not, I would probably submit my paperwork for January retirement. But that's an inside joke, by the way. Only the committee would know that I was on over the weekend. But I just want to talk about next steps. What are we looking at? I mean, you've definitely summarized it accurately. And
sorry, that would be out of order, but we are about to discuss that at the end of this, once we go to the next part of the agenda.
Okay. Then I'll wait for that.
Okay, great. So does anybody have any questions or discussion? Oh, Ganesh?
Are you able to hear me?
Oh my God.
Yes, we can hear you.
So I just felt like I didn't get to hear properly from the Oakland Unified School District representatives. They were invited, but timing didn't work out very well. So maybe it's next steps and emotion or whatever, but even in terms of looking at our.
Sorry, I was on mute. So just like I had said to Sal, that would be out of order. So methodology is looking backwards. And so it seems like your discussion is about looking forwards. So we'll definitely address that in next steps. But if we have any discussion on methodology looking backwards. Malcolm?
Yeah, I want to make one observation. I think the work of the task force appears to have uncovered a lot of issues, many of which have little to do with the SRO program per se.
And if you could wrap up your comment, because we've hit 2 minutes, but go ahead.
A lot of the concerns and complaints I've heard seem to be very much in FUSD's court and only peripherally related to the SRO program. Prevalence of mental health issues, shortcomings in FUSD policies in many areas, lack of documentation on incidents, lack of
Would you like to make a motion to extend for time, Malcolm?
I can finish in 15 seconds. Lack of guidance on even how to report an issue with an SRO, and many more.
Got it. Thank you. And so now we can go ahead and move to the next part of our agenda, and we can address next steps. So, sorry.
I would like to make a motion to extend time for that for 3 minutes.
So would that be on the previous part of the agenda?
On the
methodology?
Yeah, on the methodology. Yes.
Okay. So do you have a second?
I second it.
All right. All in favor of extending time for 3 minutes, please raise your hands. Could I get people to mute, please? I'm hearing a lot of background noise. Thank you. All right. So please lower your hands. All opposed? Uh, 3 minutes. Go ahead.
So I would like to ask, because I know the lady that spoke, the rep from USD, I'm not sure if she was a district employee. I would ask that if we were going to have her speak on behalf of OUSD again, I would like to add and recommend that an OUSD district staff member also be included. So there could be some clarifying questions that's going to happen that would be able to answer questions as well.
Yeah, so I can't answer that question, but I'm just going to defer to Priya since she helped coordinate that. Go ahead, Priya.
Yeah, so Curtis, who is the other person who came in with Jessica, but unfortunately had to leave because the SRO presentation went overtime. He's the OUSD Chief of Staff, if that answers your question. So he's a staff member. And Jessica is on their committee.
Correct.
So those two are leading that specific committee.
Yeah, but I would definitely ask that if she was to return to provide some more information, I would definitely want somebody from Oakland Unified School District, an actual staff member, an employee, that would be also present to also answer questions.
So just to limit back and forth, just to clarify. So the other member that we did invite and was present for the meeting was an OUSD employee and is the chief of staff of OUSD. And Jessica Black is a committee member that's working on organizing the safety plan. We also, and Priya, if you can speak to other OUSD representatives that you've spoken to.
Yeah, so my main point of contact was Roseanne Torres because I interviewed her for restorative practices and she's the board member at OUSD, and she recommended that Curtis and Jessica would be the best people to speak on what they're doing since they're actually part of the committee. However, I could ask Miss Torres if she'd be willing to come to one of our meetings if that's what you're asking for.
I would ask that an employee.
I want to, sorry if I may, I do not want to engage in discussion, but I will have people taking cue. So if people want to go ahead and take cue, we have 45 seconds left. Okay, so wait, Priya, did you want to finish your thought and then I'll go to Sal?
Well, I did have another thing, but I'm not sure what you mean by an employee. Are you talking about someone who works on a school site?
What I'm asking is there's a difference between a board member and a Fremont Unified School District employee, you know, from either a site or the district office.
Sal, if I may, just to be clear, Curtis is an employee of Oakland Unified.
Okay.
He's
Sorry if that wasn't clear.
chief of staff, yeah. And I did have another comment, but I don't know if I was on the queue.
You were, but you would have to extend for time because we just expired on that in methodology. Would you like to do so?
Yes, can I motion to extend time by 2 minutes?
Do you have a second?
I second.
Thank you.
All in favor? Please lower your hands. All opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Go ahead, Priya.
Yeah, this is kind of in response to Malcolm's comment. I do think that we've seen some issues with SROs directly and not just peripherally. I know that, of course, we found that the SRO, for example, at Mission was handcuffing students to chairs and the admin couldn't do anything to stop it. And I know Marie did share a lot of different comments and stories that were submitted by students with specific issues about the program. So I do think there are direct issues. They're not all peripheral in what you were saying.
Thank you, Malcolm. Go ahead. Sorry, Malcolm, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. Firstly, I didn't say there were no issues associated with SROs. I said there was a lot of issues that were not related to SROs. As far as the mission handcuffing to chairs is concerned, I'd like to know who attempted to do anything about it. What action was taken? Did the principal call Sergeant Rodriguez? Did the superintendent call the chief of police? Because it sounds to me like nobody did anything.
Thank you. And I see Priya. Is there any other comments? Go ahead, Priya.
That's a great point, and we would also like to know, which is why it was asked in that questionnaire, but they didn't respond to it. So we have no way of knowing what happened. In fact, they weren't even aware of it.
Martha, is that a comment that you have? And then I'll take Greg, and that'll probably wrap up this time.
Sorry, I just wanted to say I was there at the time and we did complain. There was discussion going on. We were told there was no recourse, that we could not say anything. There was no pushback. We didn't know to go down and make complaints at FUSD. And it was a big freaking issue. Okay.
All right. And if there's no objection, let me just take Greg's comment. Go ahead, Greg.
I was just going to ask, what year did that take place? Because Sergeant Rodriguez has only been in his role for 2 years, so I don't think saying Rodriguez's name was a fair statement when those might have occurred.
Yeah, it definitely would have been outside of Sergeant Rodriguez's tenure. I believe Sergeant Rodriguez made a affirmative statement that there have been no issues, which did not speak to his knowledge, but rather the program at large. So we can go ahead and move to next steps, or otherwise known as the last part of this agenda. Jenny?
I would just like to make a motion that we invite both Jessica Black and Curtis, I'm sorry, I don't recall his last name, back from OUSD in order to hear their entire presentation and also ensure that it is shared with the larger community. So that is my motion, to invite them back and also to prioritize them on the agenda to respect their time.
Yeah, I was going to ask that as a clarifying question, but Jenny, could you actually write that out for me? Because I want to make sure I have it faithful. If you could write it out in the chat. So is the request that it be at the front of the agenda? And if I could ask people to mute.
Yes, I believe it should be at the beginning of our agenda.
Thank you. So if you could, all right, and I believe you're writing it.
Okay.
Thanks. As I understand it, we have a motion to invite Curtis and Jessica back to speak at our meeting on October 29th, and that it should be in the first part of the agenda. And we have a second from Annie, and then Sal. While I don't take motions in the chat, if you want to raise your hand and make a motion.
Yeah, I would like to make a motion to amend that Mr. Black and Curtis, when they do come to our meeting, that they have a.
Sorry, Sal, just 1 second. 3-3, could you please mute? Thank you. Go ahead, Sal.
Yeah, I'd like to make an amendment to that motion that they can have some information around what their plan is to address, the things that site administration, schools, and staffs deal with in terms of, crime and physical altercations and drugs and those kinds of things. So I'd like to make an amendment that if we invite them back, I want them to have some information for us, because we're obviously in a position to make a recommendation. But if they don't have a plan or they don't have any information available,
Sorry, just a second. So first, you made your motion. Now I need to get a second, then you can speak to your motion.
Okay.
So,
All right,
I
point of
understand-
order. Do I
Yeah,
get to speak to my motion?
Yeah, you should have. I'm sorry, Sal. So let me pause on that. Totally. Jenny, if you could go ahead and speak to your motion, and then we'll hear your amendment. It'll follow her speaking to her motion. Apologies, Sal.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry, my Google Meet is being really slow, but I think it'd be important to invite them back because OUSD obviously has made some really important decisions on this issue, and I am interested to see how they are addressing it in their community. And I would like us to acknowledge and hear from them and hear their entire presentation without the time constraints that we had tonight.
If everybody could mute, and then thank you. All right. Thank you so much, Jenny. Right at the beginning of the meeting. And now Sal, so now that you've spoken, Sal's making an amendment that that they present, that they have information regarding, is it crimes, physical altercations, and a plan?
Well, a plan. I want them to present a plan. I mean, if we're going to be making a recommendation about SROs, I want to be.
Sorry, again, no, I just need the motion. Then we get a second, then you can speak to your motion. Sorry.
Okay. So my motion would be that they come with specific information that would help this committee move forward to make a decision regarding the SRO program in Fremont, California.
And just as a quick point, the impetus of bringing them to the meeting definitely was in line with that. We certainly wanted them to address to the board potential like logistical issues that they discovered after making their vote, et cetera. So sorry, I can't hear.
Are you going to take a second on the motion on the floor?
I am. I was making a clarifying remark to Sal's comment, and now
You can't make a remark until after there's been a second.
Thank
Point of
you.
order. You have to get a second and then you can remark. Because you're influencing the
That's
second.
exactly right. Thank you, President Campbell.
I'd like to second Sal's motion.
Okay, and then you
Thank
can
you very
comment.
much.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we have a second. So now we open it up for debate and discussion. And thank you, Ms. Raykar and President Campbell. So is there discussion and debate? I see Greg's hand. Go ahead, Greg.
And I know I'm not a non-voting member, but I think also with that, they need to come with funding sources are being used. As we know in our county, a lot of our southern schools do not get the same type of funding that other districts might get in the northern part of our county. So I just want to be, I think that'd be very helpful if they also told us what type of funding sources they might be using. And I know I can't make that motion because I'm a non-voting member, but I do think they get a lot more resources than Fremont does, to be honest with you.
Thank you. And just a clarifying comment. So Oakland does receive concentrated LCAP funds, and we receive supplemental LCAP funds, and such supplemental LCAP funds currently fund our SRO program, or at least 26%. Jenny?
I just want to say that I think a lot of these questions and requests that them to come with us with data is asking them to kind of is putting them on trial about whether or not they've kind of made the right decision, or we get to decide whether or not they've made the right decision. And that is not what I understand the importance of their presentation to be. So I think that we should ask them to share how they're building a connection between the community and their schools and the safety of their students. That's what I'm interested in hearing more about. And then we can look at our own community, because that's the important part that Oakland is doing, is they're building in the community safety for all students and not putting them on trial.
So time has, if I could ask everyone to mute. So time has exhausted, so we'll have to resolve the amendment and the vote. But Annie has a point of information. Go ahead.
Yes. What is the amendment? I'm unsure.
Yeah, so what I have is that we would request that that their presentation include discussions of crimes, physical altercations, but more specifically, a plan to address those matters.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so now that, so the original motion was to invite Jessica Black and Curtis to speak at our October 29th meeting, and that be done at the beginning of the meeting. The current amendment is what we will be voting on, that invitation also requests that they include a plan to address crimes and physical altercations. So we are solely voting on whether the invitation should come with a request for such plan. Is that clear? Does anybody have any questions?
Can I be more specific? I don't want to be as specific. I just want to talk.
We've exhausted time. So you can make a motion to extend, and then you could do that. So if you'd like to do that.
I'd like to make a motion to extend for 2 minutes.
Do I have a second?
Second. A second.
Great. All in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, please lower your hands. All opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Go ahead, Sal.
So I don't want to be specific and hold them to like physical altercations, crimes, those things. I just want to know what's the plan moving forward. I agree. I think we should hear them, but I want them to be provide us information about, you know, the movement that's being made in their district, and how they're going to replace that. That's what I'm talking about, the general plan, but it includes physical altercations. Are staff going to be required to intervene? Because to me, that would be something that might be negotiable. So those are the things I'm talking about. When we talk about people on a campus, we're talking about unit members. Unit members have contracts that bind them to responsibility. So how is that going to happen? So it's a structure, it's a union, contractual piece potentially. What are those expectations? So that's all I'm saying. I want to keep it very general. I don't have a problem. I'd love to hear what they have to say, but I want them to have a plan. I don't want them to give us some information that we've been hearing for the last 4 months. Of course, we've heard a lot of information, but I want to hear specific information, how it's going to help them track and implement schooling for kids in a safe manner.
So can I understand? So first of all, Marie, do you have a point of order? Go ahead.
Yes, I do. Sal's motion has passed, so we shouldn't be talking about it anymore.
We haven't
We haven't
voted.
voted on anything.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I just.
So right. So what we did is we were going to vote, and then Sal extended for time. So we're still discussing his amendment. So just to be clear, so because that clarification, Sal, seemed to modify your amendment, I just want to make sure I restate it for the benefit of the group. So that their invitation request a plan moving forward. Is that what you modified it to?
Yeah, on how they're going to move forward in creating that safe environment.
Okay.
Physically and emotionally.
All right. So all right. So right now and just let me confirm that the invitation include details on a plan moving forward to address being safe physically and emotionally, correct? All right. So currently we are voting on Sal's amendment, that this invitation for them to speak at the next meeting, that would happen at the beginning of the meeting. And we're voting only on the amendment that invitation include that we request that they address a plan moving forward on how to be safe physically and emotionally. All right. So all in favor of Sal's amendment, please raise your hand. All right, thank you. Please lower your hands. All opposed, please raise your hands. All right, the nays have it. We now move to the primary motion. And so that is the, thank you, Annie, I caught your vote. So that we would invite Curtis and Jessica to our next meeting, and that be done at the beginning of the meeting. So all in favor, please raise your hands. All right, please lower your hands. All opposed? Awesome, thank you so much. All right, so that concludes the meeting. And just to remind us, so the report writers are busy at work, and we're taking all the information from this meeting as well as the prior recommendations that have been made. And so we'll be presenting that on October 29th. And those are the report writers of the various sub-task forces. Do you have a clarifying question, Jasmine?
I just wanted to make a motion. Is that in order or no?
You would have to extend time because we've exhausted all time. And then you could make a motion.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me? Great. Okay, so
If you could mute your computer, because I think we're hearing you from both places.
Okay.
The other one, if you could mute the other one. There you go. And so what I was saying is we've exhausted all time. We would be adjourning, so you would have to extend for time if you're going to make a substantive motion.
Okay. I just wanted to, I think it's still echoing. Can you hear okay? Or
We can hear you okay?
so I just wanted to make a motion to have the mental health subcommittee review all the ratios for counselors for middle school / junior high and high school. Extend time. I'm sorry. I wanted to make a motion to extend time if there's no objection for just 1 minute.
Actually, Jasmine, if I may, because I just know that motion, that's within the scope of the subcommittee, and so they'd be free to do so.
Okay. So I just wanted
That
to
makes
make a motion to do that. Is that okay?
You don't have to. That's within the scope of that sub-task force.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I jumped ahead, but that adjourns the meeting. So thank you all very much, and we'll meet in a week. All right. Have a great evening. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.